You know there comes a moment in your life when you look in the mirror and realize the person staring back at you is not the person you were meant to become. And in that moment, something inside you whispers, enough. Not enough suffering, not enough fear, but enough staying small. Enough living as the old identity that no longer fits the future you're hungry for. People think change starts with action, but it doesn't. It starts with identity, because you will never outperform the story you tell yourself about who you are. If you see yourself as someone who's broken, you will find a way to stay broken. If you see yourself as someone who's limited, you will sabotage every opportunity to stay aligned with that identity. But the minute you shift the meaning, the minute you decide, this is who I am now, everything changes. Your energy, your standards, your behavior, your destiny. Most people are trying to change their life while clinging to the old version of themselves. It's like trying to run toward the future while your past is grabbing your ankle. And you wonder why you feel stuck, why progress feels slow. It's because identity is powerful. Identity is the invisible force that determines your choices before you're even aware you're making them. But hear me now, identity is also fluid. It's flexible. It's something you can shape, mold, redesign. The problem is you think your identity is a prison when in reality it's clay, and the moment you decide to reshape it is the moment your life begins again. Think about it. Every breakthrough you've ever had didn't start with a new skill. It didn't start with motivation. It started with a moment of truth. A moment where you said, I am done living as this person. I'm stepping into something greater. That's the identity shift. And when you make that decision at the deepest level, you'll notice something remarkable. You no longer have to try to change. You become the change. See, when people come to me and say, Tony, I want more confidence, I tell them, you don't need more confidence. You need a new identity, because the person you've been can't take you where you want to go. The next level of your life demands a next level you, and that identity is built by making a decision so powerful, so aligned with who you want to become, that the old version of you has no place to exist. You shift not by hoping. You shift by claiming. You shift by declaring. You shift by embodying the version of yourself that your future demands. And you do it not tomorrow, not when you feel ready, because you will never feel ready. You do it now. And maybe you've been carrying stories for years, stories someone else gave you, stories shaped by pain, by failure, by doubt. But those stories are not your identity. They're chapters. Chapters don't define the whole book unless you stop writing. So maybe today is the day you pick up the pen again, because your identity isn't what happened to you. It's what you choose to create from it. I want you to ask yourself right now, who do I need to become to create the life I want? Not what do I need to do? Who do I need to become? Because the doing will follow the being. If you identify as someone disciplined, your habits change automatically. If you identify as someone worthy, you stop accepting crumbs. If you identify as someone powerful, you stop negotiating with your excuses. The world responds to who you are, not who you pretend to be. And deep down, you already know the identity you're meant to step into. You've felt it in moments when your courage took over. You've glimpsed it in moments where you rose above your patterns and surprised yourself. That's the real you. That's the identity trying to break through. So here's the truth: transformation isn't about becoming someone new. It's about returning to who you've always been, beneath the fear, beneath the conditioning, beneath the limitations you inherited. It's about stripping away everything that isn't you and standing tall in the identity that feels like home. You're not here by accident. You're here because you're ready to stop living by old patterns, ready to stop repeating old stories, ready to stop carrying identities built from survival when your future demands identity built from purpose. Your life changes the moment you decide, this is who I am now. And when you commit to that identity with certainty, with emotion, with absolute conviction, the world will shift to match it. Because the identity you choose today becomes the destiny you live tomorrow. Your identity sets the limits of your destiny. Change who you believe you are, and your entire life begins to transform automatically. Most people never understand how powerful this truth is because they spend their lives trying to change outcomes without ever changing the source of those outcomes. They chase new habits, new routines, new opportunities, hoping something external will shift their internal world. But identity is the foundation. Identity is the silent architect behind every decision you make, every risk you take, every dream you pursue or abandon. When you believe you are someone capable, you move differently. When you believe you are someone unworthy, you shrink even when doors are wide open. And this isn't because your circumstances have changed, but because the story of who you think you are has changed. Identity is not just a concept, it's a filter through which you interpret your entire reality. If you see yourself as someone who always struggles, you will unconsciously find ways to recreate struggle. If you see yourself as someone who grows, who adapts, who finds a way, then even in chaos, you rise. The human mind is always working to stay consistent with the identity it believes to be true. That's why people repeat patterns they hate. Not because they want to, but because those patterns match the version of themselves they've accepted. Identity is powerful, and it is persistent. It will fight to maintain itself, even if it costs you your dreams. Think about someone who wants to get healthy, but still deep down believes they are the type of person who always fails at fitness. No matter how many plans they try, their behaviors will ultimately sabotage their efforts because the identity underneath hasn't shifted. Contrast that with someone who believes, I'm an athlete. I'm someone who takes care of my body. Their choices align naturally with that identity. They don't have to push themselves with willpower every single day. Their behaviors flow from who they believe they are. When identity is aligned with the future you want, action feels natural. When identity is misaligned, action feels like a fight you can never win. And the beautiful thing is, identity is not fixed. It feels fixed because you've lived inside the same story for so long. You've repeated the same beliefs so many times that they became your truth. But identity is shaped by decisions, by meaning, by the narratives you choose to accept or reject. The moment you choose a new identity, even before the world sees it, something in you shifts. You start to think differently, move differently, speak differently. You start making choices that were previously impossible because the old version of you didn't have access to those choices. A new identity expands your range. It expands what you allow yourself to experience and achieve. When you look at people who have created extraordinary transformations, whether it's in business, health, relationships, or personal power, the real shift didn't begin with action. It began when they decided to stop being the person who tolerated mediocrity, fear, procrastination, or self-doubt. They redefined themselves. They said, I'm not this anymore. This is who I am now. And once identity shifts, action becomes effortless. You no longer try to become the person you want to be. You begin acting from that identity automatically. But this shift requires honesty. It requires confronting the stories you've been carrying since childhood, the labels people gave you, the failures you interpreted as identity instead of events. You have to recognize that everything you believe about who you are was learned. It wasn't born with you. It's not your destiny unless you allow it to be. When you recognize that identity is a choice, not a sentence, you reclaim power. You give yourself permission to become the person you were meant to be instead of the person you settled for. Your destiny expands or contracts based on the identity you claim. When you claim an identity rooted in strength, possibility, and growth, life opens. Opportunities that once seemed out of reach suddenly become attainable. People begin to respond to you differently. You begin to attract what aligns with the new sense of self you've chosen. It's not magic, it's alignment. The outer world reorganizes around the inner world. And the moment you shift who you believe you are, everything else begins to shift with it. Lasting change is created not by willpower, but by aligning your actions with the identity of the person you are committed to becoming. Most people think they need more discipline, more motivation, more force to create the life they want. They try to push themselves through sheer effort, but willpower is like a muscle. It gets tired, it fades, it breaks under pressure. That's why people start strong and then fall back into old patterns. It's not because they're weak. It's because they're operating from an identity that contradicts the actions they're trying to take. When your identity and your behavior are in conflict, identity always wins. If deep down you still see yourself as someone who procrastinates, who doubts, who avoids risk, then every action that contradicts that identity requires massive effort. And eventually you snap back to what feels familiar. True transformation happens when you stop trying to force a new behavior and start becoming the kind of person for whom that behavior is natural. The moment your identity shifts, your actions shift without struggle. You don't need to convince yourself to follow through. You don't need to battle your mind every morning. You simply act in alignment with who you believe you are. This is why some people can radically change their life overnight, not because they developed superhuman discipline, but because something inside them changed. They redefined themselves. They said, "This is who I am now," and their behavior followed that decision. Identity creates alignment, and alignment creates momentum. When your identity reflects your future instead of your past, the choices that once felt impossible suddenly become obvious. You don't have to fight your way into new habits when those habits match the kind of person you've chosen to be. If you identify as someone healthy, waking up early to exercise is not a battle, it's what you do. If you identify as someone powerful, speaking up, taking action, and pursuing opportunities doesn't feel out of character. It feels natural. People who change their identity change their life because they stop resisting the path in front of them. They start living it. But this requires courage. It requires stepping away from the familiar version of yourself, the one you've known for years, the one that's been shaped by fear, disappointment, or past experiences. Your old identity has comfort, even if it brings pain. It feels predictable, and humans cling to what feels predictable. That's why change feels hard. It's not the behavior that's difficult. It's letting go of the identity that no longer serves you. When you start to shift that identity, there's resistance. Your mind will try to pull you back to what it recognizes. It will whisper stories of doubt, remind you of past failures, try to anchor you to old patterns. Not because you're incapable of change, but because your mind is trying to protect the familiar. But growth requires stepping into the unfamiliar and declaring a new standard for who you are. When your actions align with your chosen identity, consistency becomes natural. You don't need motivation to be who you are. And this alignment creates a powerful chain reaction. When you consistently act as the person you want to become, you start building reference points, evidence, that reinforces the new identity. Every action becomes a vote for the future self. And the more votes you accumulate, the harder it becomes to go back to old ways. This is how you build unstoppable momentum. This is how change becomes permanent. People often underestimate the power of small actions. They think transformation requires dramatic change, but identity is built through repetition. Every time you follow through, even in a small way, you're strengthening the identity you're choosing. And eventually, the shift becomes undeniable. You start to trust yourself again. You start to believe in the new identity because you're living it. You're embodying it. You're proving it true every single day. The person you become is shaped not by force, but by alignment. And alignment begins with a decision to no longer operate from the outdated version of yourself. A decision to choose the identity that matches the life you want, not the life you've had. A decision to act in accordance with your highest vision rather than your lowest patterns. When you align your actions with the identity of the person you are committed to becoming, change stops being something you chase and becomes something you live, you start experiencing a sense of internal power, a certainty, a clarity that wasn't accessible before because you were still tied to who you used to be. And as this alignment grows stronger, the world around you begins to shift too. Opportunities respond to identity. Relationships respond to identity. Success responds to identity. Because the world doesn't give you what you want, it gives you what you believe you are.